Hey everyone, Brian Beeler coming to you from Storage Review, and today we're taking a look at one of Supermicro's latest storage super servers. Now this guy is not super complicated, but it has been updated and it gives the enterprise access to 36 3.5-inch drive bays. Now you may be looking at the front of this thing and saying, well, 36, I don't count that, I see 24 in the front. There's a 12 drive party in the back, so we will get to that in just a moment. This is going to be perfect for warehousing data, M&E use cases, anyone with a lot of file data, backup target. There's a lot of great reasons why you'd want to run a big, dense hard drive server in your environment. This is really a mainstream workhorse for Supermicro and will really get the job done while remaining fairly cost effective. It's just a single CPU inside, but it's an Intel Ice Lake. In our case, it's a 6330, so relatively good compute power out of that CPU. But if you're going to be doing heavy lifting with data, a lot of analytics in the box, Supermicro has other solutions for that. And again, this is a really mainstream 36 bay offering, really popular in the SMB space and for others that just have some bulk video data or surveillance or whatever. Of course, they do offer many more dense offerings. We took a look at a 60 bay unit at Supercompute just a couple weeks ago, and that one, if you saw our podcast with Supermicro, had one of my favorite things, the universal toolless drive tray. This guy's got the standard drive trays with screws, so one of our people will draw the short stick and have to screw all the hard drives in. On the hard drive front, we were lucky enough to receive a couple cases of drives from WD, and in this system we're going to be running the 12 terabyte HC520 part. So the 12 terabyte drive is really a mainstream drive that doesn't have the heavier price premium of like the 18 or 20 terabyte class. So the 12s, 10s, 14s are really in the sweet spot of hard drive pricing right now. So they're a perfect fit for what we're doing with this particular server. Now, let's take a look at where this storage is going to go. The 24 drives are obviously here in the front that we already mentioned, and we'll put the 12 terabyte drives in there. But let's go ahead and spin it around and take a look at the backside that has the additional 12 drive bays and the connectivity. So I've spun the system around, and as you can see now, we've got the extra bank of hard drive bays in the bottom. There's also a nifty little SAS card here to let you use a JBOD to get more drives directly into the system. One of the big takeaways for a system with this many drives, even though it's hard drives in aggregate, especially with sequential workloads, we can churn a lot of performance out of this box. Those WD drives are going to be cruising along pretty quick, and when you add them up, real quick. So we've got two Intel X550 10G ports on here, and that'll give us the high-speed access. And because it's an Intel NIC, plenty of VMware support to make sure it's drag and drop into our existing environment with no problems. Now, I did talk about the Intel CPU in here. Let's take a look at inside what this thing looks like. All right, so as we take a look at the inside, of course, there's a hefty bank of fans up front. There's 7 there, it looks like. Those are all, of course, replaceable. Inside where the board area is relatively Spartan, and if you have a keen eye, you'll notice that it's elevated a little bit. Of course, we already showed you the back of the system where those extra 12 bays are, so of course they're tucked in underneath here. So the board is a relatively short board, single Xeon 6330 Ice Lake Gen 3 processor there, so that's pretty good. It's got 8 DRAM slots. We're fully populated with 16 gig DIMMs. As we come this way towards me, you'll notice a couple PCI expansion slots. There's 1x8 and a couple by 16, again Gen 4. Tucked in here, which is a little hard to see, is the M.2 slot, so we'll be able to drop a drive in there, use that as a system drive. Unless we didn't want to. If I move these cables a little bit, you can see perhaps, there we go, let me get my fingers out of the way, the orange Super SATA DOM expansion slots, so you can drop the drive in there and use those if you choose to, although the M.2 is probably what we shall go with. And then of course we see the cabling over here connecting to these cards to give you SAS expansion on the JBOD side on the back, and then organizing the drives for the rest of the system. Overall, nice and tidy. Looks like there should be plenty of cooling in the system, and we're going to put it to work. Let's see how it did on the performance. So taking a look at performance on this system, we went ahead and installed TrueNAS CORE using a SATA DOM, because that's what we had sitting around. Of course, if you wanted something a little peppier, you could use the M.2 NVMe bay. And we went ahead and installed TrueNAS CORE to give us a nice easy way to share out with that ZFS goodness. We opted for RAID Z3 to give us lots of resiliency, and using the default file system configuration, we had LZ4 compression enabled with dedupe turned off. Inside the system, we've got 32 Western Digital hard drives. These are the HC520 12 terabyte sealed drives. They've actually been around for a little while, but ours were manufactured last month according to the sticker. This is a high volume part for WD, and in these use cases where we're really looking at more of a mainstream capacity story, capacity value story, and not just a pure density story that we might see in like an HPC environment where high density per rack U is the driving factor. These drives make a really good companion to the Supermicro storage server. So as we get into the data, we take a look at 4K, 100% read-write throughput at first, and we can see, incidentally, we tested both iSCSI and SMB, and we topped out at a little over 309,000 IOPS read and 15,000 and a half or so on iSCSI. Similar write performance on SMB with a little bit, well, a third of the read performance. As we go ahead and drop down to the 8K 100% read-write, again we see iSCSI's got certain performance advantage here, again with 252,000 and almost a half IOPS read and about 200 and coming up on 81,000 IOPS write. The SMB story is just lower, but still very consistent, delivering a little over 102,000 IOPS write, and then about 109 on the read side. Now, what really gets interesting here is when we really push this to max interface performance, looking at the 128K 100% read-write tests. Here, SMB and iSCSI come in more or less identical at 2.3 gigabytes per second, and this is just simply a function of running out of interface overhead. The system in both configurations, the H and the L, those just refer to mostly the RAID card config inside, but regardless, on interface, they both have the Intel 10 gig dual ports, and we're just simply saturating the ports here. It's nice to see those 10 gig ports on board though, so that you don't have to use one of your PCIe slots for a NIC. That said, just looking at this performance with 32 drives, there's clearly much more that the drives can give for this particular workload. And if you considered putting something faster in those 2.5-inch bays in the back that are optional and NVMe, you can get a little bit NVMe in there, or even some nice performing SATA or SAS drives that you just drop in some of those open 3.5-inch drive bays. You might want to start to think about faster interface. 10 gig will be fine for most, but there is more to give out of this system. And hey, if you want to get really crazy, this is Ice Lake. This is latest gen Intel, and the board itself will support persistent memory. So if you want to get super fancy, you can drop some PMEM in there, get yourself a nice high-speed 100 gig or faster card, and be off to the races. Not exactly the point of this server, but it is capable of much more than we tested. So overall, it's a really nifty system. The performance came out just about where we would expect it. Really pretty impressive. And for anyone that needs a mainstream 36-bay storage server, this is a great solution. It's got Ice Lake inside, so you're getting the most modern Intel CPU silicon out of the deal. And for data lakes, backup targets, media, surveillance target, there's a lot of great use cases for something like this. And just as usual, Supermicro's done another really good job with their server. Thanks for checking in.